Educators Lead, Episode 122.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. What most organizations do is focus on strategies. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How is this going to happen? And they ignore all the toxins in the culture. If you can develop the culture, the people in the organization will solve the problems.
Welcome to Educators Lead, where we interview leaders in education to offer inspiration and practical advice to help launch educators into the next level of leadership. I'm your host, Jay Willis, and I want to thank you for subscribing to our show.
This is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Educators Lead. Let's join my friend Jay Willis and get ready to take your leadership to the next level.
Hello, EduLeaders. Jay Willis here, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Lucy West. Lucy, are you ready?
I am looking forward to it.
All right, Lucy West is the founder and director of Metamorphosis Teaching Learning Communities. Formerly the director of mathematics instruction in New York City's Community School District 2, Lucy also serves as Deputy Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, grades K through 12, for nearly 200 schools in New York City's Region 9. She is a nationally known speaker on professional development practices and a master mathematics coach. Since the mid-90s, Lucy has been at the forefront of the movement to increase classroom discourse and infuse it with rigor and equity. So that's just a brief introduction, Lucy, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I've had a pretty long career. I've been in education about 34 years now.
Wow.
And I entered the field late. I actually started in my early 30s. So I'm giving away some information about my age, but I was an actress.
Oh, wow.
And also I spent a couple of years exploring social services, social work. And the two together were probably the best preparation for teaching I've ever had. And I went to Bank Street College of Education, which was a tremendously wonderful college, one of the best in the country in terms of teacher education for elementary teachers. So between my acting career, my stint in social service, and Bank Street College, I found my passion in education, and everything I had done came together.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how do you feel like being an actress helped you as an educator?
Well, number of things. One, being an actress is something that requires you to develop presence and to develop the capacity to collaborate with others, to work in a rep company, to prepare, to be self-disciplined, to constantly be preparing you're learning your lines, preparing for the rehearsals and so forth. It's a very disciplined and self-disciplining occupation. It also gives you a lot of insight into people. And so, every kid is different. Every parent has their own personality and values and so forth. So the study of human beings is part of what actors do. And then the social service part, of course, you get to see all the hard things that go on in a lot of people's lives that you may not have experienced. Foster care, abuse, drug addiction, and so forth, that I think impact a lot of children's lives, and many teachers are unaware of how devastating some of that stuff could be and how it actually interferes with learning. So if you're more sensitive to those things and more aware of what could be going on, you could have better interactions with parents who are struggling or who are going through some hard times, and not be coming from a place of, I know it's best for your kid, or you should be doing, rather than being a partner someone who has got some compassion about these difficult times that people may be going through.
Right. Well, so, I'm jumping in really fast here, but what are some things that helped you to kind of help a student who maybe had some difficult home life situations going on to kind of, I don't know if you'd want to say check it at the door, because it's really not, but what were some things that helped you kind of help that student to kind of still be focused and engaged in learning, even when there was a lot of crazy stuff going on at home?
I had to teach them a number of things. So one of the things that I am very passionate about and believe very strongly in is that the learning environment needs to be co-created by the teacher and the children. And most children are not very skilled at conflict mediation, at solving their own problems. And many schools or school teachers want kids to inadvertently, they don't necessarily want this, but they inadvertently teach kids to be dependent on an adult to solve their problem. And I spent a lot of time, I taught 2nd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade. I spent a lot of time teaching kids how to solve their own problems. And I'm talking about social interactions, the capacity to stay focused. So we spent time focusing on self-awareness, self-management, self-monitoring, self-reflection, as interwoven throughout what we did. We had what was called a appreciation circle every Friday afternoon before we went home, where kids appreciated each other for things that they may have given or received that week. We had a conflict mediation circle every Wednesday right after lunch, when most of the conflict happens in the recess yard or whatever, where kids learn to talk through their differences and their feelings. So that's the emotional side of it. And then the other side of it is teaching kids that they're capable and that they actually can learn to focus, and that this place is a safe place for them to put their mind, which may be a worried mind, onto something that would put their worries aside for a bit. So, for example, it could be, sometimes there were 2 kids I'm thinking of that were in my, I guess it was my 2nd grade class, and they were having difficulty reading. And most of the kids went to some kind of after school program, but these 2 kids had parents that weren't, as together to get them into those programs. But I had parents who volunteered in my classroom, and so they would offer to come a couple of days a week and read with those kids or do their homework with those kids. And so those kids would just hang out in my classroom after school, and a parent volunteer would sit down with them and do their homework or read with them, which lets them know that people really care about them and are willing to help them and that they can succeed. And I think those kinds of things help the kids develop both some self-esteem, but also some strategies for helping themselves. So there are lots of ways that you can work with kids. Now, the population I was working with was mixed. So we had plenty of middle-class kids, and we had plenty of kids who were either in shelters or, had difficult home lives. So if I had a whole school full of that, I'd have to think very deeply and creatively about ways to engage lots of adults from the community to support and work with kids around emotional issues and around educational and academic issues.
Right. Well, so for maybe listeners who have some of those troubled students, or just some, students that they're really being affected by their environment, but there's definitely potential that you can see there. Like, what would be maybe one of your greatest, I don't want to say success stories, like to claim the success necessarily, but like, what would you say maybe is one of your greatest stories of where you've seen a student who came from maybe a less than ideal situation and was able to really realize a good deal of their potential later on?
I really don't know, because one of the things that's kind of interesting about teaching is the kids go on. They're with you for a year and then they go on. Maybe they're with you for 2 years if you work in a school that does some kind of, looping up or whatever they call it. But I find that to be one of the mysteries. And unfortunately, what stays with me are the situations where I wasn't particularly successful, where I thought I had been helpful and then things fell apart for that student, or, the student moved away, or things, I lost contact. So I can't really remember a specific long-term story that I could share here. I can tell you plenty of short-term stories where during a year, a kid went from maybe not having any friends and not being socially accepted to being socially accepted, which then helped improve the academics. I could see instances where kids came in 2 years behind in reading or math and caught up, things like that were, that were satisfying for me and for the students and probably their families. But I can't really tell you beyond that because it's weird. You don't always know.
Right.
And once in a while I'll bump into a kid. There was a kid I had he had a really hard time. And as a result, I had a really hard time. He would be like throwing over furniture and running out of the classroom and running all around the hallways, and the principal would be involved. And because he was having a really hard time emotionally. He was just adopted by someone, and the person really cared about him, would come to the class and stuff. And I tried for months. I think it was 4 months. And the father would come in and sit in the morning sometime. The minute the father left, the kid would act up. And I tried everything. I tried talking to him. I tried whatever we could think of, everything we could imagine to try and help him feel safe and welcomed and whatever. But it didn't work. And he eventually went to a special school, and I didn't see him for years. And I really felt badly about the whole situation. And then I bumped into him and his father in a bookstore maybe 5 years later, and he came up to me all smiles, and he said, "I remember you. You were so wonderful, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, really? That's your remembrance of what happened? It was so different from mine. It was like, wow, I felt like a failure, and you remember me as someone who was wonderful. So I don't know. Like, these stories are really, I think, it's interesting. I don't know how you know.
Yeah.
Unless people are in touch with you. Some teachers are really good about that. I'm not that kind of person. I'm just not good at keeping in touch with all my students kind of thing.
I'm the same way. I kind of just forget to contact people and keep in touch with them. Well, so I want to talk a little bit more about your personal journey, but before I kind of jump into that, what would be maybe something interesting about yourself that most people wouldn't know?
Well, I'm a pretty adventurous person. I love to go on exotic travel trips. So I've been to the jungles of Peru and Bhutan and Africa. I've been on safari. I've been paragliding. I like adventure. So I do that. And I've also seen education in parts of the world that have opened my eyes and make me a little bit impatient with American educators sometimes, because we have more stuff than anybody in the entire world, and yet we're always complaining about this or that and why we can't get this done or that done. And when you go to Zimbabwe and you work with kids who have nothing and teachers who have nothing to use to teach them, and yet somehow they learn to read or somehow they learn to add or whatever, it's a little bit like, wait a minute, folks. I think we're having the wrong conversation here. Like maybe we need to take a broader view. So sometimes I can get a little bit hard, I guess, on American educators. And at the same time, I can be 100% compassionate, because I do think the American education system has many issues going on in it that make teaching very difficult. And there are unnecessary obstacles and lack of trust in terms of educators, the country, not the country, but the politicians and the policymakers trusting educators. And the interference that educators have had in this country is well beyond any other country in the world in terms of how politicians get in the way of effective teaching here.
Right. Well, and I want to dive into that here in a bit, and just to give you an opportunity to kind of share about Metamorphosis and your mission, your vision there. But before we get into that, though, for people who may not be familiar with your story, which you kind of touched on briefly, but if you don't mind, maybe start from the beginning and talk about how you got to where you are today. Maybe even, what was your first inspiration to wanting to go into education in the first place?
Well, my reason for going into education was not very noble. I thought I was getting divorced. I had 2 sons. And I thought they were young, 8 and 9, something like that. And I thought if I went into teaching, because I was in acting, and as an actress, you're unemployed like 80, 90% of the time, and you're also in these odd jobs like waiting or secretary or what have you. So I thought, well, I'll go into teaching. I'll have the same schedule as my children, and that will make life easier for a single parent. And I thought, I'll have the summers off, right? Little did I realize that it would be my calling, and that, in 33 years, I've had 1 summer off. And the schedule, I worked night and day and on weekends, planning lessons and diving into learning how to teach. And so I don't know, it didn't actually turn out the way I had in my head. It's not a job where you can go in at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning and leave at 3 or 3:30 and go home and just spend all the time you want with your kids. It's not that kind of job. People think it is, and some teachers can do that, but they're probably more transmissionist teachers, more teachers who are more follow the book, turn the page, that's how you know what you're doing tomorrow kind of teacher. I don't teach like that. And so it took so much time and energy and devotion to learn to be an effective teacher and keep developing my skill set. So my original idea and what actually played out were 2 different things. And I think now teaching is probably one of the most noble, if not the most noble, profession, in that it can be the one that creates that helps to develop the character and the intellectual capacity of the citizens of the country. And unfortunately, we don't see much evidence of that these days in terms of how people are behaving politically and otherwise in this country. So I wonder what happened to, or how we can use our schools for their original purpose, which was to develop and inform citizenry, as well as to work in the marketplace. Once schools became commodified, okay, it's all about bottom line test scores, and it's all about, running schools like businesses, we lost our way, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the real purpose of education in a democratic society.
Right. Well, so then what was your first position? You said you taught 2nd, 4th, and 6th grade. What was your first role as a teacher?
My first position was 2nd grade. I taught 2nd grade for 4 years. Then I taught 4th grade for 3 years. And then I taught, and then I moved to a different school. So, and I was assistant principal, and I taught math in the 6th grade that entire year for 1 year. And I'll talk about the assistant principalship in a minute, because it was very different than probably what most people think of as assistant principal responsibilities. So what got me to move out of the school that I was in, because it was one of the best schools in the city. It was very progressive. It had a very divided faculty and a very smart principal who was trying very hard to get the faculty to work together. But there were senior teachers in the faculty who had been sort of left alone by the administration before this principal came for many years, and they were not particularly open to learning and growing and developing their practice. And then there were the people that this principal hired. Her name was Naomi. She hired people from Bank Street in particular to come in and infuse new life into the school. And it was difficult because those of us that wanted to took advantage of every professional development opportunity that came along, and there were many, and half the people didn't. So you had this very divided school with a very, very high reputation. And I was troubled by this as just as a human being. Like, how do we talk to each other? How do we get this school to move? And I was also starting to get a little bit burned out, a little bit tired, because I was working as hard as I described it a little while ago. Plus, I had been a member of a movement where we tried to develop, I don't know what you would call it now, but I actually see people writing about it now. And we tried it, I guess it would be 25 years ago, which was a collaboration between Teachers College, Columbia University, and our school, where where teachers in the school would co-teach university courses that would actually be held at the school. And lead teachers like myself and my colleague Fran, we would each have 2 student interns for for a semester each during the year. So a total of 4 interns would be worked with, and then of that 4, 1 would be hired the next year as an apprentice, as an intern teacher. It was a really interesting project, and we designed it, and it had funding. And as soon as the funding ran out, of course, then the program stopped. But it's like the model that people keep talking about as one that would ratchet up American education. But it keeps dying because for lots of reasons, lots of political reasons, and so forth. But anyway, I was part of that project, and I was really getting a bigger picture. I was starting to really see that there are all kinds of things that we could be doing in education, and getting sort of an itch. And then I started teaching the math for Teachers course at Bank Street College, because I was thinking maybe I wanted to go into become a professor and work at the college level. So I'm one of these sort of experimenters. So I'll try this and I'll try that. And I taught the Bank Street math course in that college for 7 years with a partner teacher. So we co-taught this class. But I started to realize that I was getting frustrated, and I thought maybe I could have a bigger impact if I started working as a building administrator. So I got the degree, the credits that I needed. And my colleague, who had been at PS 87 and was becoming a principal at another school in a different district in New York City, asked me if I wanted to be her AP. And I had already begun looking for jobs as a principal, and didn't get the one that I had interviewed for. And somehow she found out about it before I did and called me up and said, "You didn't get that job. Do you want to come and play with me?" And I was like, "What? How do you know I didn't get the job?" So it turned out to be the best thing ever, because it's really not a great idea to move from being a teacher to a principal, I don't think. I think it's a good idea to go apprentice under somebody. And if you're apprenticing under a really good principal, you can understand the difference, the role difference between leading a school and being a teacher in that school, and maybe being a lead teacher in that school. I mean, I was definitely a lead teacher at PS 87 where I started. And we designed a role for the for the assistant principal that was very different. It wasn't, I'm going to be the disciplinarian and you're going to be, and I'm going to take care of the bus schedule and this schedule and that schedule, and you're going to do whatever principals do, right? We actually sat down and we looked at all the roles that were needed, and we thought about what it meant to be instructional leaders. So this was probably 1990, I don't know, 3 or 4, something like that. Or maybe earlier, maybe 1991, whatever it was. And we laid out different roles for ourselves. So she loved literacy and social studies, and she knew I was good at the mathematics. So I took on mathematics and she took on literacy and social studies. And we were a Bank Street progressive public school. So we did integrated curriculum in either social studies or science, half a year each at every grade level, K through 5. So that's where I learned to coach. I actually started coaching teachers throughout the school in mathematics and working side by side with teachers in classrooms. A good 50-60% of my time is AP. And she did similar stuff, maybe not quite as big a percentage of her time, but quite a big percentage of her time. She would work with literacy or social studies. And we facilitated the team meetings, like the grade level meetings. Way back then, we had time for everybody to meet. We had collaborative, what would now be called like learning communities. And we worked in each other's classrooms. We watched each other teach. We did those things way back when. And I loved it. I mean, it was a great school. We had a really terrific set of teachers who worked very hard and were always pushing the envelope. And we worked long hours. I mean, we'd be leaving school at 6:30 at night sometimes, and so forth. After about 4 years of being AP, I was asked by the district to be the director of mathematics again. So they had been asking me for 3 years, and I had been turning it down because I didn't think it was going to be a role that I could really have any real influence in, because I didn't like the way the role was defined. So they asked me if I would do it, and I said only if I could define what the role is and how it's going to work. And they had gone through 3 or 4 math coordinators or directors or whatever the title was, and I thought, that sucks. I'm not doing that. So then they said, sure, design it any way you want because it's not working. It's just not working. So I spent a year. So then I became director of math. And I started in the elementary schools. And I started coaching in 4 schools. And there's a huge learning leap from being a building administrator to being a district administrator, a district coordinator. It's huge. I went from 1 school to 48 schools.
Wow.
And you don't even think about a budget. Like a school budget is minuscule compared to the district budget. And so there's a lot to learn, and that whole first year was a learning year. But I worked with Anthony Alvarado, who was a mover and a shaker in education. He was really a maverick. I loved him, and he was such a mentor. So District 2 was this delicious lighthouse district where all kinds of interesting things were going on, and all the biggest names in education were coming into our district, studying what we were doing, working alongside of us to do it better. So we worked with Lauren Resnick from the University of Pittsburgh, Richard Elmore from Harvard, what's his name, from Michael Fullen from Toronto. We worked with these people side by side. Marilyn Burns from Math Solutions. Everybody you could name in education I've met and worked with, pretty much. Wow. There's hardly anybody I can't say I haven't had a chance to work with. That was like the biggest, most wonderful time in my career because it was exciting and there were so many opportunities, and I was given the opportunity to create what I thought would work and then the money to do it. So my favorite story from that era was I was in it about a year, and things were I was starting to make sense of everything. And I saw Tony Alvarado at the water cooler. And I said, Tony, I have this idea. And I laid out my idea for how I thought we could build mathematics in the district relatively quickly, but well and deeply and so forth. And I laid it out. I said, this is what I think we should do. And he said, great, why don't you write a proposal, a grant proposal? I said, I don't know how to write a grant proposal. He said, I'll get you a grant writer, and you sit down and tell her what you want to do, and she'll write it, which I did. I think it was 6 months later, I had $3.5 million to do exactly what I set out to do.
That's incredible.
And I did it.
So something else that I kind of read in part of your story is you had a chance in that role to increase your district's ranking from 16th, wasn't it, to first out of 32 different districts in terms of student achievement in math. So what would you say, what do you think your key was to the school's success and the ability for the district to increase in that way?
The key was to understand the difference between an adaptive problem and a mechanical problem. So most districts, when they want to increase mathematics, they do things like the following. Let's get a new set of curriculum materials. That will solve the problem. Never mind that they're now on their fourth or fifth set in the last 10 years or something. So one issue is like, we'll solve it by doing something mechanical. We'll get new curriculum. Part two, we'll assign people to be math specialists, and they'll help kids that are failing. We'll do things like that because we're thinking of the problem as a mechanical problem. In other words, we're thinking there's already an answer to this problem that somebody else knows, and if we just do that, then everything will be fine. But that's not true. If you actually look at why the mathematics scores or why kids were not learning mathematics, it's a very complex picture. How well do the teachers understand the mathematics themselves? How do they define mathematics? Is it learning to add, subtract, multiply, and divide? Learn some procedures and practice? Or is it the study of patterns and relationships to understand the world quantitatively and spatially? I mean, those are two very different definitions. What do you actually think mathematics is? That's a big question. And there was no consensus in the district as to what it was, nor was there consensus as to what effective mathematics teaching actually looks like, feels like, and sounds like. So most districts start moving ahead as if there were consensus among those things when there's not. And so everybody's sort of working at odds, although they're trying to work on the same thing. There's not enough time spent and careful enough attention spent to how to build a common understanding of something, whatever it might be. So I'm still working with districts on this all over the country. I'm just working with a district on the East Coast now that I walked into. They wanted me to tell them how to help raise their test scores and get their kids to do well, and they wanted me to focus on middle school. Well, I walked into all the issues that you see. First of all, elementary and middle don't talk to each other. Second, not because they don't like each other. It's just not in the setup of a district. The elementary adopted a curriculum materials this past year, not using a rather aborted process, and now all the teachers are having trouble with it. And now the middle school teachers want to adopt a curriculum which doesn't align with the one that the elementary teachers just adopted. I mean, you can go on and on and on with how complex this is. So we decided, and Tony had a philosophy. It's all about instruction. And the way you actually change things in the system is through conversation. Now that sounds like, huh? What do you mean you change things through conversation? Well, you have to have about 1,000 conversations, and you have to have them over and over with different groups and again until people start to come together in their understanding of what the work involves. And it's not that you're not doing the work while you're doing that. You are. But if you don't have those conversations, you end up at cross purposes and nothing really ever takes root or change, or changes sustainably over time. And people don't want to hear that. They want the scores raised next year. And they don't want to put the time in up front to develop the culture. District 2 was a learning culture. That there are very few districts that I work with, and I work with a lot across the country and in New York City and so forth. There are very few districts that are actual learning cultures. Many of them use the jargon of a learning culture or try to set up learning cultures, but they don't actually live in a learning culture. Learning cultures are not They're not friendly in the way that everybody's polite. I mean, people are nice to each other pretty much, but the point is they're challenging each other. They're nudging each other. They're calling each other on stuff. If you don't have that going on in a district, nobody's really learning anything. Maybe in small pockets, maybe at one school, but it's not district-wide.
Right. Well, it sounds like maybe that the learning culture is more of a philosophy and less of a recipe. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. Look, what's his name? Peter Drucker. Mm-hmm. Peter Drucker is one of the most respected people in how you develop learning organizations or successful businesses. And he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. What most organizations do is focus on strategies. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How is this going to happen? And they ignore all the toxins in the culture. And unless you pay attention and you don't let the culture off the radar screen, it's culture, culture, culture. Like if you can develop the culture, the people in the organization will solve the problems. If you don't develop the culture, you're constantly using a top-down model, imposing it on people who are resisting you. You just set it up that way. You set it up because you didn't find out what the real issues are. And this happens when people take over districts all the time. It's why it's so frustrating in education, because you have superintendents that are there for maybe 3 years or whatever, and then they move on to a bigger district and somebody else comes in, changes everything. Before they even study what's going on, they change everything, because whatever they were doing last year in some other district is probably going to work here. And if they bring in their people and they make everybody do it, it's going to make this district better. And 9 times out of 10, it causes nothing but chaos and frustration and hostility. And so that change process in education is very frustrating. Partly because in big cities like New York, there's so much turnover that it's hard to root something so that it stays with the people. Because once somebody learns something, once you learn to teach mathematics well, you can't go back to teaching it badly, no matter what anybody tells you. But if you never learn that, you're just like being blown around in the wind by who's ever telling you whatever to do, whatever you're supposed to be doing next.
Yeah. Well, so I kind of derailed you. You were going down the path of your personal journey. So I guess what was the next phase then? I think was that the deputy superintendent? Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually left the district. I wrote a book called Content Focused Coaching: Transforming Mathematics Lessons. Uh-huh. This book was a book that came out of the work we were doing, District 2 was doing with the University of Pittsburgh. And I was working with a visiting scholar from Switzerland who was a researcher, and he and I had the same question: who coaches the coach? Because I went from coaching teachers in PS 234 to coaching teachers across the district and to being asked to teach other people how to coach. And I'm thinking, how do I do that? Because I was being somewhat successful in my coaching, as evidenced by teachers' practice changing or scores going up or whatever. But I am now supposed to teach other people how to do this thing, and I'm like, I'm not sure I know how to do that. So he and I studied coaching. We studied coaching by videotaping every coaching sequence I did with a teacher whenever he was in town. And he came in town, for a week at a time, several times a year, and we would coach. I would coach maybe 3 or 4 days that week, and then we'd have all this video, and we would sit down and we would study it. And in the study of the video, we would name the moves where we actually saw evidence of what was important to do in a coaching pre-conference, how it showed up in a lesson, and how it shows up in the post-conference, and then what didn't work, like when I forgot to check for understanding, or when I gave too many suggestions, or whatever it was I was doing that wasn't so successful. And then we started naming these things. And then I started teaching these things, because what I was doing in District 2 was developing a cadre of coaches for the schools. I wanted to develop, we had 16 coaches for 48 schools, which is not a bad ratio. We had one for every 4 schools. So that's not bad compared to what some people think they have or have now. So I began practicing with these people because we would meet every Friday all day, and we would plan work for the district. We would study coaching. We would study mathematics. It was K-12, and we would coach the rest of the time. So everybody was in the schools every day coaching 4 days a week and then working together on the 5th day. So that resulted in a book called Content-Focused Coaching, and a model of coaching that is pretty well respected around the country and used in many, many colleges and districts as a model of coaching. That book kind of put me on the radar screen, and I started getting calls to consult. And I thought, I've been doing this thing for 7 or 8 years. I'm kind of a restless person, and I'm always wanting to grow and learn. I thought, I'm going to leave the district. Tony Alvarado had already left, and it was sort of changing. And I thought, I'm going to leave and go become a consultant. So I left, and then Bloomberg took over the city school system as mayor. He gained control of the city schools, and he changed everything, as usual. He said, we're doing everything different. So he turned the districts into what are called regions, and he took 4 districts. So District 1, District 2, District 5, and District 9 became one region. And there were 10 regions in the city, and Shelley Harwain was asked to be superintendent of the region. She had been superintendent of District 2 at that point. She called me up and said, come and work with me. Come and be my district, deputy superintendent. So I said, well, I just left, I left a few months ago. I had the party and everything, So she said, no, come back. So I came back, and I helped her design how Region 9 would work, because I love systems thinking. And I sat there, and I knew what we had done with the coaches in District 2 and how could we spread this. And I had a really cool time setting it all up. And I actually thought in the beginning that the Bloomberg initiative might be good, because the Board of Education was really not great. We had lots of bureaucracy and crazy things happening in the city. And I thought, you know what, maybe this could work. And the way that Bloomberg initially kind of put it out there, it sounded like he was a big systems thinker. And I thought, cool, this could be fun. So I went back to work with them, and lo and behold, it was not fun at all. It was real struggle, because because when he assigned Klein to be the chancellor, Klein was a lawyer. He had no experience in education. And Bloomberg was a businessman. He had no experience in education. And they used a very fear-based model of leadership and a very strong business model of leadership that just was so debilitating for most people in the system. They fired a lot of people, most of whom carried a lot of the history in the system. And so then they hired very young people, and they did a lot of data collection and a lot of dictating and so forth of what you could and couldn't do, and brought in a lot of technology and all these business experts like Jack Welch was one of the first people to speak to us as the superintendents and deputies. And he said to us, and I'll never forget this, here we are, the top, educators in the city, and he said, you are all corporate property. And if we want, we can take you from one school and put you in another.
Oh, wow.
And that we have the right to do that. And we were like stunned.
Wow.
Sitting there stunned. Like, what are you talking about? So the year was a difficult year, but I did get a lot of things organized. And I got I fought like hell to get certain things to happen, because we now were supposed to hire 200 math coaches and 200 literacy coaches over the summer to start in September.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, insane. That is crazy. I am not doing that. So in my usual rebellious fashion, I said, we have some people from District 2, because by that point we had already developed 75 teacher leaders along with our 16 coaches, but some of them moved on. Like some of the coaches went to other regions to become directors of math or whatever, and some of them stayed. And then some of the teacher leaders were willing to come out of the classroom and some weren't. And then I had to look at the other districts to see what they could offer, and none of them had developed any coaches. So I ended up hiring 80 math coaches and 90 literacy coaches, and they were nowhere near the caliber of what I was used to working with, except for the people that I already knew from District 2. So I had to get them up to speed quickly, but also, realistically. So I decided that all the coaches were going to be coming out of the schools on Fridays. We were going to have 40 meetings. And those 40 meetings were going to teach them how to coach, how to dive into mathematics, how to dive into literacy. They were two separate groups. And I hired a bunch of, we knew how to do some of it, but then I hired some consultants to do the parts we weren't so good at. And I made them train my staff. So if I hired you as a consultant, you aren't going to come in here and do your dog and pony show. You're going to come in here and you're going to teach us how you think, how you design whatever it is you're doing, and we're apprenticing with you. And then I'm going to publicly debrief with you at the end of the coaching day, the meeting with the 80 people, 90 people, whatever. And we're going to reflect on how it went and what worked well and what we learned and what we're going to do next. And we're going to get input from people. And we set this up. And it worked. People got better pretty relatively quickly. I mean, we still had a lot of loose, different levels of understanding, but we had a clear process for coaching. We had clear criteria for what you need to do in a school on a given day. And I set up a cadre of 10 people in the math world at the district level who I knew were good coaches by that point. And they each had I think it was 8, 9 people or whatever it was. They each had 8 or 9 people to mentor. So they might coach in 1 or 2 schools, but they mentored the other 8 or 9 people under them so that people were getting on-site development on their coaching. And that was happening in literacy as well. So at the end of the year, and the other thing I did, and this is the thing I'm most proud of, we had the hardest district in the city in terms of economics, and that's the 9th district in the Bronx. South Bronx has the lowest performing, district in the country or something. So Bank Street, as you know, is my alma mater. We could not get coaches or teachers to go work in the South Bronx, which was very frustrating for me because that's where we needed them the most. So I contacted the dean at Bank Street and said, look, you guys say you're for equity. You say you're for this and that. How come there's not one Bank Street teacher or student teacher in the South Bronx? Well, it's really hard, blah, 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 yada, yada. I said, I get it. We both understand this is a problem. What I want is to work together. I want you to put 4 student teachers in the South Bronx. I'll find 2 really strong principals in the South Bronx this year. I want them in there this year so that we could start developing this program. It took us 6 months to get it off the ground, but we did manage to get 4 student teachers into 2 schools in that first year.
Wow.
And took a lot of, politics and this and that. So when I left, I told my successor, because I left at the end of the year. I resigned at the end of the year, but I told my successor, look, this is our baby. And she understood, and she was a District 2 person, and we knew each other a long time. I said, Barbara, keep this going if you can, because this may be the way that we can help in the South Bronx. And then I left. I started my own company and went on the road and so forth. But I talked to the dean at Bank Street about 3 years later, and we were working on another project, and he said to me, do you know what happened in the South Bronx? I said, let me guess, it all fell apart. He said, no, There's now 43 teachers from Bank Street teaching in the South Bronx.
Wow.
So it's all about like thinking about partnerships and trusting that people are smart and giving them opportunities to work in ways that they're not used to, because you're giving them opportunities to develop their genius, to show you what they got, you know, and connecting players. It's about connecting people.
Right.
The system is designed in silos, and everybody's working solo, and everybody's got their own territory. Well, erase the freaking boundaries. Don't put the walls up. Take the walls down and start to talk to each other across disciplines, across grade levels, across institutions. And when you do that, you can create all kinds of amazing things.
So what was it you think that gave you the courage and what was it that inspired you and gave you the strength and courage to make that phone call? Because it sounds like a gutsy phone call.
This is a true story. I told you I love Tony Alvarado. He was like a mentor, and he was not in the district. But the city kept saying, we want to do what District 2 did. And they would bring Tony in every now and again to tell them what we did, and then, of course, not do anything he said. So he came to visit me in District 2, in Region 9, and he said, how's it going? And I complained about how it was. And he said to me, Lucy, at this level of the system, people get fired all the time. Get fired for the right reasons. And I said, thank you, Tony. Like, it just liberated me. Because it was probable that people were going to get pissed off at me at some point or another anyway. So I might as well do what I thought was right and, get fired. What the hell? So I did. I just did everything I thought I should do and didn't pay much attention to what people told me I could or couldn't do. I just did it. Luckily, most of what I did was relatively successful. Some of what I did got the superintendent a little upset now and again, and we would have our arguments and so forth. But you see, a leader has to know who she is, what she stands for, and what she's willing to risk. And I was willing to risk my job. If you're willing to do that, you got all the power in the world. Because how many teachers, how many educators are doing things that they know in their heart of hearts are not good for kids, but they're scared of losing their jobs. And that eats away at your soul, at your courage, at your vibrancy in life. If you can't do what you believe to be right or good, and right, I'm not talking about right and wrong, because a lot of it is very gray, and a lot of it is very difficult to know what's right. But if you can't do what in your heart you're saying, this would be better for kids, and you don't do it because you're scared, you lose courage. Courage is not built by being fearful. It's by looking at the fear, like really checking out the risk, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to lose your job. Even though it seems scary, you're not. There's too much stuff that other people would have to go through to fire you. So they might give you a hard time, but they're not likely to fire you that quickly or that easily or over one important thing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like we jump to this gigantic risk, and it's not there. Teachers tell me, well, if I taught like that and the principal came in and observed me, then they would fire me. I'm like, really? I don't think so. If a teacher came in and saw you doing something if the principal came in and saw a teacher teaching in a way that the principal didn't like, what would probably happen is they'd have a conversation. Maybe she'd write up something. That might be the worst thing that happened. You're not going to lose your job because you taught a lesson in a way that the principal didn't like one day. That's not going to happen. It's just not real. Now, if you did it over and over and you and the principal can't agree and you keep what the principal sees as defying the principal, then yeah, maybe you will. But if you learn to talk to each other and find common ground and work on common goals, which would be a much smarter thing to do, then you're going to not only not lose your job, you're going to help change the culture.
Boy, I love it. I love it.
So what it means to be a leader is you can lead from any position in a system. I was a leader from a teacher position. I was a leader from an AP position. You don't have to be in a position of authority. And in fact, the role of authority is not necessarily leadership. There are many people in positions of authority who are not leaders. They might keep the place safe. They might manage things well. They might, make sure all the rules are followed, but they're not leaders. And there are plenty of people who are not in positions of authority who are leaders. Leadership is influence, period. That's it. It's all that it is. It's learning to influence your circle of people in your circle of influence, and then helping them influence beyond that, and then beyond that. That's what leadership is. And what are you leading about? What's your vision? What is it you're trying to accomplish? To me, it's to me personally, now at Metamorphosis, it's raising the profession as a whole. Like, I think that it's kind of frustrating and scary that there are so many people in this country who cannot reason very deeply in a political conversation. And it just breaks down. There's no conversation going on.
Yeah.
And that's adults as well as young people. So what happened to our goal as educators to educate the citizenry? Now, that implies that educators have to be emotionally intelligent, politically intelligent, and need to be, real thinkers, real learners, and so forth. We have 4 million teachers in this country. They're all over the spectrum in terms of adult development. So not all teachers are at the highest level of adult development. If you're a black and white teacher in your thinking, you follow the rules, you do what you think, what you're told without much questioning and so forth. How are you going to teach kids to think, reason, problem solve, question, make sure that facts are accurate, make sure that what's being asked of them is not going to harm society or, some group of people or whatever. If you're not doing that, you can't teach it.
Right. You're probably going to teach them how to follow rules effectively if you're kind of a black and white thinker, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so I'm loving this conversation, but I want to make sure that we dig into this one last part of your journey, and that's where you currently are. So I'm curious to know what brought about Metamorphosis.
Okay, well, two things. One, coaching or consulting is a very lonely road. Even if you're in a system, usually you may be like a coach at a district, but you work at separate schools, or you might be a coach in a school, but there's nobody else who's coaching in that school except you. Or you're a consultant like I became when I left Region 9, you're on the road and you're coaching wherever. That's a very lonely road. And what I wanted was to create a think tank for coaches, for people to come together who are real smart and, be my partners in thinking about things and, offer services to the schools that were not your dog and pony show stuff. You don't come to this thing because we have packaged this lovely little thing and we're going to sell it to you and you're going to come and do this. But actually to really think hard about how do you engage with schools or districts as partners in which you co-design what works for that school. And what are you basing that on and so forth. So when I left the region, I worked part-time for a consulting agency to make sure that I had enough income to support myself. And I started Metamorphosis by just being myself, going around and, coaching around the country or whatever. And I had to incorporate to protect myself legally. So I did that. And then after a couple of years, I left to working. Had been working part-time for this other organization, and I had so much work to do on my own that I didn't need to work under another umbrella. So now I was working by myself. So that was maybe 2 years in. And then by maybe the third or fourth year, I had more work than I could handle. And I knew, a couple of people, Tony Cameron and Ann Bergender, who work with me and have for the last probably 10 years. And so I gave them some of the work under my umbrella. So they would work under the Metamorphosis umbrella, and we would meet and we would have these lovely heavy-duty conversations about education and change and all this stuff, and we would teach each other. And then we got more work, and so it doubled, and now we have about 20 to 25 part-time consultants, some more full-time than others, and 7 employees. And our mission is to build the home team of the school, of whatever schools we're in or whatever districts we're in, and that home team to see themselves as, leaders who know how to develop culture, who know what it takes to move a system, as well as to dive deeply into, generally it's mathematics that we're hired to help them with, but we also have consultants who are very brilliant and published and so forth in literacy or in science, and 1 or 2 in social studies. So we have a range of consultants. We're well known for mathematics, and we are known for content coaching. So our second book, Tony Cameron wrote with me, is called Agents of Change: How Content Coaching Can Transform Teaching and Learning. And we meet as a team, all of us, all 30 or so of us, meet as a team 5 times a year, 5 days a year, and we teach each other. We dive into mathematics. We look at the connections between mathematics and literacy, between science and literacy, and science and mathematics and literacy. We study coaching. We bring our videotapes of ourselves coaching. We break into small groups and we study each other coaching. We go into the field. Tony, Ann, and I go into the field and we study our coaches in the field and mentor them. We have fun. I mean, we dance. We have little dance breaks. We have someone on our team who's a salsa dancer, and he teaches us how to salsa dance during these meetings. We sometimes we paint together, or we do yoga or qigong together. So we break up our meetings with what we think are healthy things for us to do, and fun things. And then we offer institutes. So we have mathematics institutes that go for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or 5 days, which we offer in the city to any teacher that wants to take them. And then we create customized institutes for districts or other organizations that want us to do that. We coach all around the country, and I do a lot of work in Canada. We're now branching into London and Spain. So we're having a lot of fun, and people love working in this organization. People don't leave because the culture is a learning culture. Everybody's working their edge. Everybody gets feedback. Everybody learns how to give and receive feedback without taking it personally. We read books like Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, Influencer, Thanks for the Feedback. We just read Reasoning Routines. So we do these little reading groups and stuff. We just keep making it up and having more fun. We like inventing things.
Yeah. And so if one of our listeners wants to kind of check that out, what's the website?
The website is www.metamorphosis, T as in teaching, L as in learning, C as in communities. So metamorphosistlc.com. And we have lots of free things, like lots of videos on the website that you could watch that are a lot of people use in their districts or in their schools as professional development because they're short and they're specific to particular topics. We have handouts that we give away for free. We have articles that we like a lot and we post there. So there's lots of resources on the website. And there's a blog. We just started a blog. We're calling this the Year of the Blog. So we now have, I think, 5 blogs up since we started in January. And I've written 2 of them, and 2 of our consultants have written, and another consultant has one that she writes regularly that's now connected to our blog. So we're excited about the blog, and a number of us are, collaborating on writing blogs. So it's fun.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'll make sure to put that website in the show notes as well. And in addition, I'll also put the 2 books that you mentioned, Content Focused Coaching, and then also Agents of Change, both of those books. So I'm going to run through just a couple of these rapid fire questions if you still have just a couple minutes.
I just wanted to add one
go
other
ahead.
book. My latest book is called Adding Talk to the Equation, and it deviates from the first 2, which are all about coaching. This one is all about and it's it's really a video toolkit. So it has a number of videos in it, grades 1 through 6, and it shows the development of discourse in the classroom at different stages of development and at different grade levels. And I think it's a really cool resource for people, and it's also on the website, easy to find.
Great. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. That's great. So if you have just a couple minutes, I have a couple rapid fire questions I was going to ask if you've got time.
Sure.
Okay. So first question, what would you say is the best leadership advice you've ever received?
Get to know your people really well, what their passions are, what their strengths are, and work on the culture. Like, find ways to tap into the genius of people, to tap into their passion, to support their growth and development, and work like crazy to make sure that the culture is a learning culture that is very healthy, where people talk directly to each other, where they talk about the work, and they don't take it personally.
Do you have a book or 2? I know you've read, leaders are readers, right? I know that you've probably read hundreds of books, if not thousands, but do you have maybe a book or 2 that stand out to you that you'd recommend that have made a large impact on you?
The one that made the greatest impact on me was called Influencers. I don't remember the subtitle, and Kerry Patterson, Kerry Patterson et al. Wrote it. It's a really smart book about how people change the world, how you influence change. And it's kind of doable. They have a website called Vital Smarts, which you can find all their books, and we've read them all. The one is Crucial Conversations, the other is Crucial Accountability, the third is Change Anything, and the fourth is Influencers. I love them. I love their stuff. That's one. And then the adaptive leadership work, I think, is very important. I think it's Heifetz who wrote Adaptive Leadership, as what I was talking about earlier, really learning to distinguish and then understanding the complexity of learning how to make change that is truly going to help everybody grow and root what you're trying to change.
So what, if you were to just give a school leader and administrator one piece of advice as far as working with the teachers, what advice would you give?
It's collaborative, like to be collaborative with a teacher, to work side by side and to focus on evidence of student learning, student thinking, student understanding. Less focus on, like, what is the teacher doing? What is the teacher doing? Because when you do that, you're focused more on like the teacher gets more defensive. But when you're both studying, is what I'm doing as a teacher causing learning to take place with students, and then which students and which not? When you kind of come at it from that perspective, you're both going to learn and grow, and you're not going to try to impose mechanical things like you have to have 7 minutes of this and 12 minutes of that, and you have to write this on the blackboard. You're not going to do that because that's all mechanical.
So the last question I have, if you had a time machine and you could jump in it and go back to the point in time when you first made the decision to go into school leadership, what advice would you go back and give to that younger version of yourself?
What would I teach the younger version of myself?
Right.
To not be such a perfectionist. To not, I think to slow down and to be more compassionate with people who were not at the same place or thinking the same way that I was. I could get really frustrated very easily because I had this big drive and this big vision kind of thing, and I could be impatient with people. And I think I was impatient with myself. So patience, kindness, compassion. I mean, I wasn't really mean, but I think there's too much pressure. And some of it is self-imposed. So I would tell that person, you know what, relax a little bit. It's all gonna be fine, and it's gonna work out. And just be kind to yourself.
Boy, I'm gonna internalize that advice myself. That's great. Well, so finally, if one of our listeners wants to reach out to you after the show, what would be the best way to connect with you?
To go on the website, and there's a page, I think it's a contact us page, and as soon as you type something in there, my assistant gets the request, whatever it is, and I respond. If it's something I need to respond to, he sends it to me and I respond. So I don't go to the website every day because I'm too busy to do that, but I respond. I'm very quick at responding to people's requests or queries or whatever.
Great. EduLeaders, this has been a great interview today. For the show notes of today's show and other resources, visit educatorslead.com and type the word Lucy into the search tool to find her show notes. Lucy, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was a lot of fun walking down memory lane.
Yeah. And that wraps up another episode of Educators Lead. This podcast is brought to you by Mometrics, the #1 test preparation company. Mometrics offers study materials for over 1,800 different exams, including the SAT, ACT, GED, end-of-course exams, state standard exams like the STAR, teacher certification exams, advanced placement, CLEP, ASVAB, GRE, and so many more. Mometrics takes the mountains of information students could be tested over for any given exam and boils it all down to just the fluff-free golden nuggets of information that are most likely to be on the exam. They couple that with some great study tips and test-taking strategies to help students maximize their test scores. With their interactive tutorial videos and a layout that makes lesson planning easy, Mometrics study guides, flashcards, and practice questions are a great fit for individual or classroom use. To learn more about our products and our vault of hundreds of free tutorial videos, please visit educatorslead.com/test prep. That's educatorslead.com/test prep. EduLeaders, thank you for joining us on Educators Lead. Visit us at educatorslead.com for everything we talked about today, free resources, and much, much more.